In June 1995, a violent crash in Emporia, Virginia, claimed the lives of two young men. One was identified quickly, but the passenger was a complete mystery for decades. On June 26, 1995, 21-year-old Michael Hager gave another young man a lift after a Grateful Deceased concert. That day, the two young men shared the road as they traveled through Virginia. At approximately 1:30 p.m., tragedy struck when the vehicle they were in crashed into a pair of trees in Emporia, Virginia. The collision was devastating and claimed both of their lives. They were not wearing seatbelts. The authorities quickly identified the driver as Michael, but the passenger posed a far greater challenge. He carried no identification, and no one at the scene knew who he was. Without a name, the passenger became known only by a nickname created from the circumstances of his demise: Grateful Doe. In the days and years that followed, his case became one of the most widely discussed examples of an unknown accident victim. Several belongings found with him were preserved as potential clues. Among them were two ticket stubs from the concerts held at RFK Stadium in Washington, D.C. on June 24 and June 25, 1995. Another significant discovery was a handwritten note. It was addressed to Jason and signed by two individuals identified as Caroline O. and Caroline T. The note included a phone number with a 914 area code, but the full contact details were incomplete. Despite efforts to trace it, the investigators were unable to link the number to anyone connected to the case, and the identities of the two Carolines remain unknown. In addition to the note and concert stubs, the investigators documented several personal details that stood out. He had a homemade star tattoo inked onto his left arm, a beaded necklace, and other distinctive possessions that reflected his lifestyle. Unfortunately, despite the detectives' best efforts, the case went cold. In January 2015, after 2 decades, the story of Grateful Doe took an unexpected turn from across the globe. A Reddit user in Queensland, Australia, stumbled upon the case while researching unsolved mysteries. Fascinated by the details, the user began gathering more information and later shared it on Imgur. The post included specifics such as the cause of demise, the clothing the man had been wearing, the items found with him, and several of the facial reconstructions that had been created over the years. The Reddit user's intention was simple: to circulate the information in the hopes that someone might recognize the unidentified young man. That effort soon proved successful. A message arrived from someone who had seen the reconstruction and believed he recognized the victim. He explained that the face looked strikingly similar to one of his old roommates from Illinois, a young man he remembered by the name of Jason. He described him as a free-spirited hippie surfer type, which matched the image long associated with Grateful Doe. Not long after this recognition, the case began to grow in public attention. The story of Grateful Doe spread quickly, catching the interest of mainstream media outlets. Soon, it went viral across social media platforms, reaching a much wider audience than ever before. It was through this growing wave of exposure that the case finally reached someone very close to the truth. On Facebook, a woman named Margaretta Evans came across the photos and reconstructions. To her, the young man in the images was immediately recognizable. She identified him as her son, Jason Callahan, who had disappeared years earlier. Determined to confirm what she already knew in her heart, the authorities arranged for a DNA test in early 2015. The results confirmed the match. Grateful Doe was indeed Jason Patrick Callahan. Jason was born on April 18, 1976. During his late teenage years, Jason was living in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. A key part of Jason's life was his passion for music. He was a devoted fan of the American rock band The Grateful Deceased, whose following spanned generations and created an entire culture of community, freedom, and travel. Jason's admiration for the band went beyond casual interest. It became an important part of who he was, shaping his lifestyle and the choices that would eventually alter the course of his life. In June 1995, when he was just 19 years old, Jason made the decision to leave his home and follow them on their tour that summer. The band's concerts were more than shows. They were gatherings where fans came together in a nomadic community, traveling from city to city in pursuit of music and belonging. Yet, what Jason could not have known was that this decision, taken with excitement and hope, would place him on a path toward danger. The investigators reflected on the case and explained why Jason had gone so long without being identified. A detective noted that Jason's mother had attempted to report him missing, but because of the nomadic lifestyle associated with the community, she was unsure of which jurisdiction should handle the report. As the years passed without word from him, Jason's family came to believe that he had simply chosen to live his life elsewhere. When the truth finally emerged, it was met with mixed emotions. While the identification brought long-awaited closure, the detective admitted to a lingering sadness. He expressed that Jason's case might have been resolved much sooner if the proper missing person report had been filed and directed correctly. At the same time, he acknowledged the power of social media in finally solving the mystery. After 2 decades, Jason Callahan had his name restored, and while the story carried a melancholy weight, the most important fact remained. Grateful Doe was no longer unknown. In October 1983, the body of a 23-year-old man was discovered in Spalding County, Georgia, mutilated with an X carved into his stomach. Decades later, a cold case investigator reopened the file, uncovering old secrets through new witness testimony. Timothy Coggins was born in 1960 and spent his childhood in Spalding County, Georgia. He grew up in a large, close-knit family, surrounded not only by his siblings, but also by cousins who were like brothers and sisters to him. He was one of 8 children in the household, with 3 brothers and 4 sisters. Timothy was raised by his mother, Viola Dorsey, and his stepfather, Robert Dorsey. Music and dancing were among Timothy's greatest joys. He was known for enjoying life, often finding expression through rhythm and movement. For work, Timothy often joined his stepfather in practical trades. He painted, laid bricks, and handled carpentry and plumbing, skills he learned directly from Robert. Timothy also lived in ways that set him apart from many around him. In a community where racial divisions were strongly felt, he socialized openly across racial lines. Many of his friends were white, and he even dated white women. He moved through these interactions without fully realizing the risks they carried in that era and place. Timothy did not know the danger that was waiting ahead of him. In October 1983, tragedy struck when 23-year-old Timothy's life was ended. His body was discovered in a condition that spoke to the violence he endured. He had been stabbed more than 30 times, and the investigators noted a deliberate mutilation. An X had been carved into his stomach, a mark resembling the emblem of the Confederate flag. The brutality of the wounds revealed the deep hatred behind the attack. Further details of the crime painted an even more disturbing picture. Evidence showed that Timothy had been dragged behind a truck before his body was abandoned. His remains were left beneath a large oak tree, a tree that carried its own dark history in the area and was locally known as the Hanging Tree. This location added a chilling weight to the crime. Law enforcement would later conclude that the crime was racially motivated. In the social climate of the time, Timothy's openness in crossing racial boundaries became a dangerous point of contention. His associations, particularly his willingness to date white women, drew the anger of those who sought to enforce segregation through fear and violence. The investigators determined that one of the triggers for the attack was his relationship with a white woman. In the eyes of the suspects, his social choices were considered unacceptable. This, coupled with his broader friendships across racial lines, marked him as a target. His slaying served as a grim warning meant to instill fear in the black community. Despite the savagery of the crime and the clues surrounding it, the case would remain unresolved for decades. In December 2016, more than 3 decades after Timothy's life was taken, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and the Spalding County Sheriff's Office decided to reopen the case. A cold case investigator revisited the long-dormant file, looking more closely at the evidence and stories that had circulated for years. As the investigation progressed, the authorities began to gather fresh witness testimony. Individuals came forward with statements that shed new light on what had happened that October night. Some recalled hearing suspects brag about their involvement, openly admitting to the stabbing. Accounts described the number of stab wounds as being between 28 and 32, closely aligning with the brutality that had been recorded at the crime scene. Witnesses also recalled details about Timothy being dragged behind a truck and about the motivation behind the attack. Consistently, testimony pointed toward the same cause: Timothy's relationships and socializing across racial lines. These statements gave investigators the evidence they needed to move forward. The reinvestigation eventually led to a wave of arrests. 5 individuals were taken into custody: Lamar Bunn, Sandra Bunn, Gregory Huffman, Frankie Gebhardt, and Bill Moore. Among them, Gebhardt and Moore were directly accused of carrying out the crime itself. The others were charged with offenses related to interfering with the investigation. For the first time, accountability seemed possible. The prosecutors argued that Gebhardt and Moore's anger over Timothy's relationship with Gebhardt's girlfriend was the driving force behind everything. Gebhardt was brought to trial, and on June 26, 2018, a Spalding County jury convicted him on multiple counts, including felony slaying, aggravated assault, and concealing a demise. His sentence was life in prison plus 30 additional years. Moore, who was Gebhardt's brother-in-law, chose to plead guilty rather than face trial. On August 16, 2018, he admitted to voluntary manslaughter and concealing the demise of another. For this, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, followed by 10 years of probation, and he was banished from the Griffin Judicial Circuit. Meanwhile, Lamar Bunn, Sandra Bunn, and Gregory Huffman faced charges of obstruction and other lesser crimes, accused of attempting to interfere with the long-overdue investigation. Timothy's brother, Tyrone Coggins, said his demise took a heavy toll on the family. He said, "We were shocked. We were like, who would hurt this guy? You know, this was Tim. This was the smooth guy, the guy that never bothered nobody, always helped somebody." His sister, Talisa Coggins, remembers her brother Tim as someone who was very sweet and outgoing. She said, "He was the kind of person who could get along with anybody." His headstone reads, "In loving memory, Timothy Wayne Coggins, gone, but never forgotten." In October 1992, a 70-year-old woman of Mill Bay, British Columbia, and her car vanished without a trace. Janet Margaret Staniforth Farris was born in 1922. She later married Walter Earl Farris, a man with whom she built a life. Their marriage lasted many years until Walter's passing in 1984. His demise left Janet a widow, yet she continued on, maintaining her role as a mother and adapting to the challenges of life without her husband by her side. Janet and Walter had a son who also resided in Mill Bay, British Columbia. The connection with her son anchored her life in many ways, keeping her tied to her family and community. On October 1, 1992, Janet left her home with the intention of traveling to Alberta for a wedding. It was meant to be a routine trip, one she embarked on alone, but she would never return. When she failed to come back as expected, her family members quickly grew concerned. What began as worry soon turned into fear when there was still no sign of her. Her family, realizing the seriousness of her disappearance, reported her missing to the police. A missing person report was filed, and the authorities took immediate steps to begin tracing her movements. The initial objective was clear: to determine where Janet could have gone and what might have happened during her journey. Through their investigation, the police were able to reconstruct parts of her travel route. They confirmed that Janet had been driving solo to Alberta. Along the way, she had stopped to spend the night at her sister's home in White Rock. The following day, she continued her trip, making a recorded purchase for fuel at the Tappan Esso station, located east of Salmon Arm. After that purchase, Janet vanished. Neither she nor her vehicle were ever seen again. It was as though she had disappeared without a trace, leaving the investigators with only the faint outline of her last known movements. The sudden loss of contact made the situation even more unsettling for her family, who hoped each day for any word of her whereabouts. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched an extensive search effort. Highway patrols were conducted in the hopes of finding some sign of her car or her presence along the route. Aerial searches were carried out using helicopters to scan large stretches of road and terrain. Search and rescue volunteers, along with family members, joined in, combing through roadways and surrounding areas where Janet might have been. Despite these efforts, no substantial lead ever emerged. The days turned into weeks, and the investigation offered no breakthrough and eventually went cold. On August 24, 2019, nearly 3 decades after Janet's disappearance, her vehicle was finally recovered from Griffin Lake in British Columbia. The finding was made possible by a 13-year-old boy named Max Warenka. While spending time at Griffin Lake, Max and his mother noticed what appeared to be the outline of a vehicle submerged just off the shore. The sight was unusual and immediately drew their attention. Their curiosity would soon uncover the key to Janet's case. Equipped with a GoPro camera, Max decided to take a closer look. He dove into the lake, maneuvering underwater to capture video footage of the object. The recording clearly showed the shape of an overturned car resting beneath the water's surface. His quick thinking and determination provided tangible proof that something significant had been hidden in Griffin Lake for years. The initial assumption was that the submerged car might have been connected to a 2009 accident known to have occurred in the area. This theory seemed plausible at first glance, given the passage of time and the lack of immediate details. However, questions arose as more people examined the situation more closely. An off-duty officer from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police viewed the discovery and proposed that the vehicle could be tied to an older case. This suggestion shifted the focus of the investigation and prompted further action. It was no longer just a curious find. It might finally solve a mystery that had remained unsolved for decades. A professional dive team was brought in to confirm the car's identity. Divers carefully recovered the license plate from the submerged vehicle, and once it was examined, the truth was revealed. The plate matched Janet's missing car, conclusively tying the discovery at Griffin Lake to her disappearance in 1992. When the vehicle was finally pulled from Griffin Lake, the investigators confirmed that Janet's body was still inside. The grim discovery closed a chapter that had been open for 27 years. While it was heartbreaking to find her in such circumstances, the recovery provided long-awaited answers for those who had lived with uncertainty for decades. The authorities quickly determined that her demise was not considered suspicious. Instead, the evidence suggested a tragic accident. The investigators speculated that Janet may have lost control of her vehicle while driving along the lake road. It was possible that she had swerved to avoid striking an animal or another obstruction, which may have caused her to veer off the road and into the water. Her son, George Farris, spoke about the family's reaction to the discovery. After so many years of unanswered questions, he expressed a sense of relief at finally knowing what had happened. Although the loss was still deeply painful, the clarity of the discovery offered a measure of peace. The uncertainty had been lifted, and with it came some degree of closure. Janet's remains were respectfully recovered, and arrangements were made for her cremation. Plans were set for her to be interred alongside her husband, Walter Earl Farris, in Mill Bay. The reunion of her remains with her late husband symbolized the closing of a long and painful separation, both for Janet and for the family who had waited so long for this outcome. George explained that the family had long believed Janet's disappearance was most likely the result of a car accident during her journey to the wedding. Theories within the family included the possibility of a medical emergency, the chance she may have fallen asleep behind the wheel, or the likelihood she had swerved to avoid an animal or sudden obstacle. These possibilities had remained in their minds for years, unanswered until the car's discovery. Above all, George emphasized that the worst part of the ordeal had been the uncertainty of not knowing. In December 1983, a young mother from Richmond, California, went missing. DNA analysis would link the perpetrator to the crime decades later. Marsha Carter was born in 1958. By the time she reached the age of 25, she was already carrying great responsibilities on her shoulders. Marsha was a single mother, raising 4 children on her own. While focusing on her role as a mother, Marsha was also involved in a turbulent personal relationship. She had been in an on-and-off relationship with a man named Cheryl Smothers. The connection between them was far from steady, marked by cycles of closeness and distance. Despite the instability, their relationship remained a recurring part of Marsha's life. On the morning of December 7, 1983, Marsha's 3 older sons, whose ages ranged from about 7 to 11 years old, entered their mother's bedroom. What they saw was alarming and confusing. Blood was visible on the mattress, but Marsha herself was nowhere to be found. The absence of their mother immediately set off a wave of fear for the children, who were left without any explanation for the troubling scene. Inside the same room, the boys made another unsettling discovery. Their infant brother, only about 10 months old at the time, was found hiding beneath the bed. The baby's presence in such a vulnerable position only added to the distress of the moment. Faced with fear and uncertainty, the children quickly sought help, running to a neighbor's house to raise alarm about what they had witnessed. The authorities responded quickly once the call for help was made. The police officers arrived at Marsha's home and immediately began an investigation into her disappearance. They examined the disturbing evidence inside the bedroom, carefully noting the blood on the mattress and the condition of the home. Their immediate priority was to determine what had happened to Marsha and to ensure the safety of her children. As the search expanded, the police worked tirelessly to find any clue that might reveal Marsha's whereabouts. Interviews, evidence collection, and local searches were conducted in hopes of uncovering answers. Despite their efforts, Marsha remained missing in those first crucial days. Her disappearance left her children, her community, and the investigators with more questions than answers. It was not until 10 days later that a devastating discovery was made. Marsha's body was found inside the trunk of her own car, which had been abandoned and parked in West Sacramento. The grim discovery confirmed the worst fears of both her family and the authorities. Marsha had been the victim of a violent and tragic end. Even with the recovery of her body, the investigation struggled to move forward. The police sought to understand how Marsha ended up in the trunk of her vehicle, but concrete leads failed to emerge. Without clear evidence pointing to a suspect or a motive, the case lost momentum and ultimately went cold. Starting in 2008, 25 years after the case was opened, the authorities decided to take another look at Marsha's case. Biological samples and DNA evidence that had originally been collected in 1983 were carefully revisited, with the hope that modern testing could reveal what had once gone undetected. For years, the case had remained unsolved, though the investigators had long harbored suspicions about Marsha's on-again, off-again boyfriend, Cheryl L. Smothers. Smothers was a wealthy man who, by that time, had been left wheelchair-bound after a car crash in 1989. His connection to Marsha and the troubled nature of their relationship placed him in the spotlight of suspicion, but it was not until the DNA reanalysis that the investigators believed that they had a breakthrough. The new testing revealed a link between Smothers and the crime. DNA evidence discovered in Marsha's residence tied him directly to the case. With this connection, the prosecutors moved forward, and in 2016, a grand jury formally indicted Cheryl Smothers for ending the life of Marsha. The case finally went to trial on September 20, 2018. The prosecutors presented their evidence to the jury, including the crucial DNA samples that had been identified on Marsha's clothing and within her home. After decades of uncertainty, the courtroom became the stage for long-awaited answers about what had happened to Marsha. By the end of the trial, the jury reached a decisive conclusion. In September 2018, Smothers was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years to life. For many, the verdict seemed to deliver justice after so many years of unanswered questions. However, the resolution would prove to be far from final. In 2021, the First District Appellate Court overturned Smothers' conviction, dramatically changing the course of the case once again. The court cited serious errors made by Smothers' defense attorney, particularly in handling the complexities of the DNA evidence. Adding to the shock was an unexpected twist. DNA found under Marsha's fingernails was matched to a man named Kevin Sennett, who lived in Wisconsin and had no known connection to Marsha or the events in California. Sennett's name was kept from the jury during the 2018 trial. It is unclear whether the Contra Costa District Attorney will move to retry the case. In May 1974, the calm atmosphere of a small Florida neighborhood was shattered by the sound of gunfire. Despite witness statements, the case went cold for decades. Freddie Farah was born in 1940. At the age of 34, he had already established a stable and meaningful life for himself. He was married to Nadia Farah, the woman who shared in his dreams and stood beside him through the ups and downs of life. Together, they built a loving home and were blessed with 4 children, each of whom he adored deeply. His family meant everything to him, and those who knew him described him as a caring and dependable husband and father. Freddie was also a hardworking man, dedicated to providing for his loved ones. He owned and managed the Grand Park Food Store, a small but popular convenience store located at 2361 Kings Road in Jacksonville, Florida. Everything in Freddie's life seemed to be moving forward peacefully. His business was steady, his family life was filled with love, and his future appeared bright. But beneath that calm surface, fate had something unimaginable in store. Freddie had no idea that a terrible danger was slowly approaching. On May 22nd, 1974, tragedy struck the life of Freddie. That day began like any other, with Freddie tending to his customers and managing his daily business operations. However, the calm routine was abruptly shattered when an unknown suspect entered the convenience store and demanded money from him. What started as a robbery quickly escalated into a violent encounter that would end in heartbreak. As the confrontation unfolded, Freddie moved away from the cash register, attempting to comply or perhaps diffuse the tension. The assailant then moved in front of the counter, closing the distance between them. Without hesitation, the suspect pulled out a firearm and opened fire, striking Freddie. The police were quickly dispatched to the scene following reports of the shooting. Emergency responders arrived promptly and found Freddie gravely injured. Despite their immediate efforts, Freddie's condition was critical. He was rushed to the hospital in hopes that his life could be saved, but sadly, his injuries proved too severe. Freddie was pronounced deceased, leaving behind his wife, children, and a devastated community mourning the sudden loss of a man known for his kindness and dedication. In the aftermath of the tragedy, law enforcement began an intensive investigation to identify the person responsible for the senseless act. The officers collected evidence from the store and began interviewing potential witnesses. One witness who had been inside the store during the incident reported hearing the suspect shout, "Give it to me," or "This is a holdup," moments before the shooting took place. The same witness described seeing a black male fleeing the store immediately after the gunfire, running out the door and disappearing from sight. Strangely, despite the apparent robbery attempt, the suspect did not take any money from the cash register or anywhere else in the store. This unusual detail puzzled the investigators and suggested that something may have gone wrong during the attempted robbery, or that the crime might not have been motivated purely by theft. The investigators had very little to work with beyond a few fingerprints collected from the crime scene and the witness statements recorded at the time. As years turned into decades, the file on Freddie's case grew cold, leaving his family and the Jacksonville community without closure. In 2016, more than 4 decades after Freddie's life was tragically taken, the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit decided to revisit the case using advanced forensic technology unavailable at the time of the original investigation. The detectives turned their attention to the evidence that had been preserved from 1974, including several fingerprints collected from the scene of the crime. With the help of the modern automated fingerprint identification system and newly expanded databases containing millions of digitized prints, the investigators hoped that technology might finally reveal what years of searching could not. Their efforts soon paid off. In 2017, the cold case unit received a long-awaited breakthrough. One of the fingerprints from the original evidence matched those of Johnny Lewis Miller, who was by then a 60-year-old street performer living in New Orleans, Louisiana. Miller's fingerprints were already stored in the system due to prior unrelated arrests, and it was this digital trail that finally linked him to this case. In May 2017, Miller was arrested in New Orleans under an out-of-state warrant for second-degree slaying and attempted armed robbery. The arrest marked a major milestone for both the investigators who had kept the case alive and for the Farah family, who had waited more than 40 years for justice. During police interviews, Miller reportedly admitted to being involved in the fatal robbery attempt, though he did not provide full details about the incident. His partial confession later became part of a plea negotiation. In April 2018, Miller agreed to plead guilty to a lesser manslaughter-type charge rather than face a full trial for slaying. As part of the plea agreement, his sentence was set to time served, which amounted to the 344 days he had already spent in jail since his arrest. This legal resolution, while controversial to some, finally brought an official close to the decades-old case. A unique aspect of the plea deal required Miller to meet directly with members of the Farah family. During this meeting, he was expected to explain his actions and express remorse for the pain caused by his crime, an act intended to promote a form of restorative justice. For the Farah family, it was a bittersweet moment. Though no punishment could ever undo their loss, they were at least able to hear the truth from the man responsible for taking Freddie's life. Following the resolution of the case, law enforcement officials released a statement acknowledging the perseverance and dedication of the cold case unit. They stated, "We are happy to have been able to support the Farah family and will continue to do so through the court process. We also want to extend our sincere appreciation to the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and their cold case team. 43 years is a long time, and we are so thankful that they took the time to review and reprocess this case. They remind us why, against all odds, against all logic, we still hope." Freddie's only son said, "People may ridicule me for saying this, but I almost feel sorry for him. He came from nothing and he is going back to nothing. It does me no good to have him sit in jail. Now I have my questions answered. I was a 6-year-old kid and I needed answers, so now I'm at peace." As Miller left the court, he mouthed the words "thank you" to the family. Bobby responded with a thumbs up. In May 1998, a building manager in the San Francisco's Diamond Heights neighborhood uncovered a horrifying scene. Despite numerous leads and interviews, the case went cold. Lisa Christine Valdez was born on September 6, 1961, in San Francisco, California. As an adult, Lisa pursued a career as a computer programmer. Outside of work, Lisa cherished spending time with family. One evening, she decided to host a small dinner party at her Diamond Heights condo. The gathering was intimate, just Lisa, her mother, and her mother's boyfriend enjoying each other's company over a quiet meal. For Lisa, it was another opportunity to celebrate the closeness she held dear, a simple night meant for good food and warm conversation. But as the evening unfolded, an unseen danger loomed on the horizon. On May 20th, 1998, the building manager of Lisa's condo made a horrifying discovery. After investigating a foul odor coming from her unit, he noticed that the door was slightly open and decided to check inside. What he found would shock the entire community. Inside the home, the authorities soon confirmed that Lisa was deceased, her body showing signs that she had been lifeless for several days. The scene was brutal and chaotic, suggesting a violent struggle and a frenzied attack. Lisa had been stabbed more than 20 times in her upper body and face, the sheer number of wounds revealing the level of rage behind the assault. She also bore defensive injuries on her hands, indicating that she had fought desperately for her life. Because of the advanced state of decomposition, the investigators could not determine whether she had been indecently assaulted. The bedroom was soaked in blood, especially on the mattress and pillows, testifying to the savagery of the crime. Adding to the disturbing nature of the scene, Lisa's long hair had been cut, leading the investigators to believe the perpetrator may have taken it as a trophy. As the investigation began, Lisa's mother provided critical information to the authorities. She told them that she had last seen her daughter on the night of May 16th, when Lisa hosted the dinner party for her and her boyfriend. They had spent the evening together, and Lisa appeared happy and relaxed. Her mother left around midnight, unaware that it would be the last time anyone would see Lisa alive. The next day, Lisa missed her regular dance class, something highly unusual for her. 4 days later, her body was discovered. Lisa's mother also told the investigators that her daughter took great pride in her long hair and would have never willingly cut it. This detail supported the police theory that the perpetrator was responsible for the disturbing act. A neighbor further contributed to the timeline, reporting that around 1:26 a.m. on May 17th, they heard a loud noise followed by the sound of someone running down the stairs. Around the same time, Lisa's computer was abruptly turned off, which led the detectives to conclude that she was likely attacked shortly after the dinner party ended. Forensic analysis revealed the presence of male DNA in the blood evidence collected at the scene, along with latent fingerprints on the bathroom toilet seat. The investigators also interviewed Lisa's housekeeper, who said that she had visited the condo on May 18th, 2 days after the dinner party. The housekeeper recalled seeing Lisa's body on the floor and hearing a male voice inside the home. Believing that she had interrupted something, she quickly left without realizing the gravity of what she had witnessed. The detectives pursued several persons of interest, testing their DNA against the evidence collected from the crime scene. Each one was eventually ruled out, leaving the investigators without a match. The male DNA and fingerprints failed to match anyone in existing databases. Despite the initial leads and physical evidence, the investigation slowly lost momentum. Without new information or suspects, the once active case eventually went cold. In 2011, more than a decade after Lisa's demise, the investigators received an unexpected hit through CODIS. The DNA profile recovered from the bloody crime scene matched that of a man named Anthony Quinn Hughes, who was about 52 years old at the time. The match came after Hughes was arrested in San Francisco for a shoplifting charge, during which his DNA and fingerprints were collected and entered into the system. What began as a minor offense suddenly reopened one of the city's most haunting cold cases. The investigators confirmed the match through multiple lines of evidence. Along with the DNA link, a fingerprint lifted from the toilet seat inside Lisa's condo matched Hughes's middle finger. This physical evidence placed him directly at the scene of the crime, even though his name had never appeared in the original investigation. The sudden emergence of a suspect after so many years stunned both the detectives and those who had long followed the unsolved case. When Hughes was brought in for questioning, he initially denied knowing Lisa at all. However, as the interrogation continued, he eventually admitted that he had known her during their teenage years. He claimed that they had dated briefly in high school and said that he had run into her once in the 1980s, but insisted he had not seen her since. Despite his denials, the investigators found his explanations inconsistent with the mounting physical evidence linking him to Lisa's case. One critical detail stood out to the detectives: there were no signs of forced entry into Lisa's condo. This suggested that she had willingly allowed her perpetrator inside, indicating that the person responsible was someone she knew and trusted. When the investigators presented Hughes with the forensic findings, his demeanor shifted dramatically. In a shocking moment during questioning, he asked for a pen and then stabbed himself in the chest and neck before the officers managed to subdue and save him. His violent reaction further raised suspicions about his guilt. Evidence at the crime scene also suggested that Hughes may have remained in Lisa's home for more than a day after ending her life, before fleeing. The state of the apartment and certain forensic indicators supported this unsettling theory. Eventually, in December 2015, the case proceeded to trial, where Hughes was convicted of first-degree slaying. However, the charge of attempted assault ended in a mistrial due to insufficient evidence. Following his conviction, Hughes filed a motion seeking a new trial. The judge ultimately reduced the conviction from first-degree to second-degree slaying, citing procedural factors and the complexities surrounding the intent behind the crime. In 2016, Anthony Hughes was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison. Records later confirmed that he was incarcerated at the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton, San Joaquin County. In 1972, a 21-year-old man set out on a journey from New York to California, but failed to return home. The case would only be solved decades later after effort made by a concerned family member. Robert Hutton was born in 1951. At the age of 21, he had taken on work in the construction industry. In 1972, when Robert failed to return home, worry quickly turned into fear. His mother waited, hoping for word or a sign of his whereabouts. But as the days passed with no contact, she knew something was wrong. She went to the police authorities and filed a missing person report, desperate for help in finding her son. The investigation began immediately, with the officers gathering what little information they could about his recent movements. Robert's mother told the police that he had been traveling from New York to California at the time of his disappearance. He often relied on hitchhiking or traveling by bus to get from place to place, a common practice for young men of that era seeking to see more of the country. It was not unusual for him to be on the road, but this time was different. He had vanished without a trace. Her account gave the investigators their first direction, but it also raised serious concern given the dangers of cross-country travel. Unfortunately, despite the detectives' best efforts, the case went cold. In 2011, almost 4 decades after Robert's case was opened, a new effort began under the direction of the Cook County Sheriff's Office to identify the unnamed victims of John Wayne Gacy. Gacy's crimes had shocked the nation. He was convicted of 33 crimes in 1980 and later executed in 1994. Each of his victims had been a young man, many of them traveling alone, trusting, and unaware of the fate that awaited them. The timeline of Gacy's cases stretched from 1972 to 1978, years marked by the disappearance of many young men. Most of their bodies had been discovered buried in the crawl space beneath Gacy's home in Norwood Park, Illinois. The gruesome discovery had left the authorities with the difficult task of identifying all the victims, some of whom were never matched to a name or family. It was a painstaking process that continued long after Gacy's conviction. Decades had passed since Gacy's arrest and execution, but advances in DNA technology and renewed public interest gave investigators new tools to work with. They invited families of missing persons from the 1970s to come forward, submit DNA samples, and share any information that might help match the unidentified remains to a name. It was a wide-reaching effort to finally bring closure to families who had been waiting for answers. Among the families who responded was Robert Hutton's. His sister submitted his name to authorities as a possible Gacy victim, believing it was finally time to find out what had happened to her brother after all those years. The investigators noted that Robert fit the general profile of many of Gacy's victims. He was young, on the road, and often hitchhiked or took the bus, patterns that matched those of others who had fallen prey to Gacy. The fact that Robert was traveling across the country, likely passing through Chicago during that period, raised unsettling possibilities. The more the authorities looked into it, the more it seemed plausible that Robert's disappearance might be connected. The investigators began following the lead, using updated records and resources unavailable in the 1970s. Their search led them to a man named Robert Hutton, living in Colorado, who shared the same basic identifying information as the missing young man. From there, the trail extended further west, eventually reaching rural Montana. It was there that the authorities located the man who had once been presumed deceased, alive and living quietly under the same name. In April, the investigators confirmed that this man was indeed the same Robert Hutton who had disappeared in 1972. When questioned, Robert told the police that he had simply gotten caught up in the lifestyle of the 1970s. He explained that, as the years went by, embarrassment over having lost contact with his family made it easier to continue avoiding them. What had begun as youthful freedom slowly turned into decades of silence. Robert also shared that he had made attempts to reconnect in the 1980s and 1990s, but had difficulty finding his relatives after so much time apart. Ironically, He never knew that the owner of a nearby bar, just a few miles from where he lived, was his stepmother's brother. The years had separated him from his past so completely that even familiar faces and connections were hidden in plain sight. After being found, Robert reunited with his father and sister, closing a chapter that had remained open for nearly 40 years. The confirmation that he was alive brought both shock and relief to his family, who had long feared the worst. With Robert's reappearance, the missing person case that had once linked him to one of America's most infamous serial offenders was officially closed. In November 2012, a shocking discovery, made halfway across the world in Denmark, would expose one of Georgia's most disturbing child exploitation cases. Launched in November 2012, Operation Sunflower, a sweeping initiative, was designed to locate and rescue victims of child abuse while pursuing those involved in the creation, possession, and distribution of explicit child images. It was a massive effort, uniting law enforcement agencies across the country under one coordinated front to root out those exploiting children in the darkest corners of the internet. Operation Sunflower was itself an extension of an even larger ongoing effort, Operation Predator, a Homeland Security investigations initiative created to protect children from predators. This nationwide campaign sought to track down offenders who not only consumed or shared illegal material, but also those who traveled internationally to engage in acts with minors, participated in child trafficking, or reoffended after prior convictions. Through these interconnected operations, federal agents worked tirelessly to expose individuals using advanced digital forensics and coordinated intelligence sharing to dismantle online networks of abuse. In November 2012, when the Danish authorities stumbled upon a chilling discovery during an unrelated explicit child images investigation. While examining a seized computer, they uncovered a series of disturbing images depicting the abuse of 2 children by an unidentified man. The images were immediately forwarded to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement's Cybercrime Center, which serves as a global hub for tracking and identifying perpetrators of online child exploitation. Analysts at the center meticulously examined the files and determined that the images had been produced in Georgia, leading them to alert Homeland Security investigations agents in Savannah. The Savannah office quickly took action. Using digital forensics, location data, and cross-referenced intelligence, special agents were able to identify the man in the photos as Stephen Keating, a 52-year-old resident of Jessup, Georgia. Within 24 hours of that identification, HSI, along with federal, state, and local law enforcement partners, executed a search warrant on Keating's home. What they uncovered confirmed their worst fears, a vast collection of explicit material and evidence that tied Keating directly to the crimes. He was taken into custody that same day, ending years of abuse and marking a significant victory for international law enforcement collaboration. During Keating's court hearings, the evidence presented painted a horrifying picture. Between 2009 and 2011, Keating repeatedly molested 3 children, all under the age of 12, recording and photographing the assaults to create explicit child images. These images were later distributed online, perpetuating the victim's trauma. The investigation did not stop there. Following his guilty plea, the authorities discovered that Keating had also indecently abused at least 12 additional minors whose assaults were not recorded. The magnitude of his crimes shocked even veteran investigators, revealing a predator who had operated unchecked for years under a facade of normalcy in a quiet Georgia town. Brock D. Nicholson, special agent in charge of HSI Atlanta, condemned Keating's actions, calling the case a powerful example of the evolution of global cooperation in child exploitation investigations. Nicholson said, "The hideous abuse Stephen Keating inflicted on more than a dozen children can never be erased. But hopefully his victims can find some comfort in the fact that he will never again be a free man." He credited the swift coordination between Danish police and U.S. law enforcement for ensuring that Keating was identified, arrested, and his victims rescued in less than a day after the initial images were discovered. U.S. Attorney Edward J. Tarver echoed Nicholson's sentiments, emphasizing the gravity of Keating's crimes and the justice system's unwavering resolve to protect children. Tarver stated, This defendant's lengthy sentence represents the lifetime of pain and anguish he has brought upon his victims. Depraved acts such as these will bring together every facet of law enforcement to ensure the severest punishment allowed by law. In July 2013, Keating pleaded guilty to multiple counts of child exploitation and one count of distributing explicit child images. Each exploitation charge carried a mandatory minimum of 15 years and a maximum of 30 years in prison, while the distribution charge carried a minimum of 5 years and a potential maximum of 20. In addition to his 110-year prison term, Keating was ordered to serve at least 5 years of supervised release and to register as an offender upon completion of his sentence. In July 1981, a 24-year-old woman went missing in Birmingham, England. With limited forensic tools at the time, the case went cold until a breakthrough came decades later. Nova Welsh was born in Jamaica in 1957. When Nova turned 10, her mother, Lorna, made the difficult decision to move to the United Kingdom with her 2 daughters. Lorna wanted to give her girls a better life and more opportunities, even though it meant leaving behind the familiarity and comfort of their home in Jamaica. At the age of 16, Nova met Osmond Bell, a young man who quickly captured her heart. Their connection was immediate, and despite their youth, they decided to take their relationship seriously. They made the bold choice to live together. Their love seemed strong in the beginning, and 2 years later, they welcomed their first child, Jonathan. 4 years after Jonathan's birth, they had another son, whom they named Lee. The family appeared happy to the outside world, and Nova took great pride in being a mother. However, beneath the surface, their relationship began to deteriorate. The affection and connection they once shared slowly faded away, replaced by tension and resentment. Arguments became more frequent, and soon, domestic violence entered their home. Osmond reportedly began physically abusing Nova, controlling her movements, and threatening her life if she ever tried to leave. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly volatile, leaving Nova emotionally drained and fearful for her safety. Unable to carry the burden alone, Nova confided in her younger sister, sharing the pain and fear she endured. She expressed how unhappy she had become and how much she longed for peace. Eventually, Nova decided she could no longer live under such circumstances. She ended her relationship with Osmond, determined to find happiness again. After some time, Nova met a man named Wayne Newby. Hoping to start fresh, she allowed herself to fall in love again. Wayne began visiting her home, and their relationship blossomed into something that gave her hope. But this new chapter in her life angered Osmond deeply. His jealousy and violent behavior worsened, and Nova found herself once again surrounded by danger, unaware that an even darker fate awaited her. On July 27, 1981, Nova failed to show up for work. Days went by, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Her disappearance was sudden and without explanation. It was Nova's best friend who first noticed something was wrong. She called Nova several times, hoping to hear her familiar voice, but every call went unanswered. Growing uneasy, she decided to go to Nova's apartment to check on her personally. When she arrived at the apartment, she found the door locked. She knocked several times, calling out Nova's name, but there was no response. The silence inside was unsettling. At first, she thought perhaps Nova had traveled abroad without telling anyone, but something did not add up. Hanging on the clothesline outside were freshly washed clothes, an odd detail that made her realize something was terribly wrong. On August 9th, unable to shake her worry, she went to the police station and officially reported Nova missing. 2 weeks after Nova's disappearance, the police began a formal search. They reached out to Osmond Bell, hoping he could provide information about her whereabouts. Osmond claimed that he had not seen Nova in days and suggested that she might have left for America with her new boyfriend, Wayne. Meanwhile, Nova's 2 sons were staying with him, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding. Then, 3 days after the missing person report was filed, a strange letter surfaced. It was handed to Nova's best friend, who quickly turned it over to the police. The handwriting appeared to belong to a woman, but the identity of the writer was unknown. On August 18th, a neighbor called the police to report a strong foul odor that had begun spreading through the area. The smell seemed to be coming from Nova's apartment upstairs. Responding officers broke the lock and entered the home to investigate. The stench was overpowering, leading them to a cupboard located under the stairs. The door to the cupboard was locked, but the lock appeared to have been tampered with. A piece of chewing gum was oddly used to keep it sealed. When the officers finally opened the cupboard, they were met with a horrifying sight. Inside was the decomposing body of a woman wrapped in a blanket. The body was soon identified as belonging to Nova. She was wearing a nightgown, and despite the state of decay, her features were still recognizable. The scene was heartbreaking and disturbing. The police immediately called for an ambulance, and Nova's body was taken for an autopsy. According to the post-mortem report, she had lost her life due to pressure applied to her neck, indicating that she had been strangled. The piece of chewing gum from the cupboard lock was carefully collected as evidence. While the world searched for Nova, she had been lying lifeless inside her own home. Osmond emerged as the prime suspect. He was arrested and held in custody for 4 days, during which he was questioned repeatedly about Nova's demise. Osmond maintained his innocence, insisting he had nothing to do with it. With no solid evidence linking him directly to the case, the police were forced to release him. The investigation continued for some time, but with no new leads or breakthroughs, the case eventually went cold. In 2016, cold case investigators began reviewing older unsolved cases, hoping that advancements in forensic science might finally bring long-awaited answers. Among these cases was the tragic case of Nova, whose end had remained a haunting mystery for more than 3 decades. By this time, genetic testing had advanced significantly since the 1980s, offering new possibilities for uncovering evidence that had once seemed useless. The investigators revisited the materials collected from the original crime scene, determined to find something that could point to the perpetrator. During their review, the investigators made a crucial discovery. DNA testing on the piece of chewing gum used to seal the cupboard door where Nova's body was found revealed a match to Osmond Bell. The same DNA profile was also identified on the anonymous letter that had been sent to Nova's best friend, an attempt to shift suspicion toward Wayne, the man Nova had recently begun dating. The DNA evidence was described as having a 1,000,000,000 chance of belonging to anyone else, leaving no doubt about the connection. Following the discovery, Bell was arrested in 2016 and charged in connection with Nova's demise. After years of waiting, the case finally went to trial at Birmingham Crown Court in 2017. The court heard that Bell had ended Nova's life in a fit of rage after learning about her new relationship. The prosecutors explained that in the aftermath of the crime, he had tried to mislead the investigators by sending a forged letter, pretending to be someone else, and suggesting that Wayne was responsible. The details painted a picture of a jealous and violent man desperate to conceal his guilt. Testimony during the trial revealed that Nova and Bell had continued living together even after their separation, but their relationship had become deeply toxic. Witnesses recounted how Bell had repeatedly threatened to end Nova's life if she ever left him. This threat, once dismissed as an angry outburst, took on a chilling weight as the evidence unfolded. Despite the prosecution's efforts, the jury found Bell guilty of manslaughter, concluding that he had not planned the crime but acted in anger. In March 2017, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison. After 36 long years, justice had finally been served. Nova's mother, Lorna, expressed a deep sense of relief and sorrow as she gave her statement to the press. She said, "Finally, after 36 long years, Nova can rest in peace. The family can now have closure knowing the person who took Nova's life has been brought to justice. I would sincerely like to thank everyone involved in bringing this case to court." A police officer who had worked on the case also reflected on its significance. He stated, "With the advances in technology assisting our old investigations, we can bring people to justice no matter how long after the offense has happened." In August 1660, a 70-year-old man set out on a short walk in Campden, England, and never returned. With no body and mounting suspicion, the disappearance spiraled into one of the most shocking criminal cases of the 17th century. William Harrison was born around the year 1590. As an adult, William entered into service under Lady Campden, where he worked as a steward and estate manager. This position placed him in charge of overseeing the smooth running of her lands and financial affairs, a role that demanded both precision and honesty. Within the community, William was known as a man of strong moral standing. His work often required him to travel, collect rents, and mediate disputes between tenants, tasks that could easily lead to mistrust or resentment if handled poorly. By the year 1660, William was nearing 70 years old, an age when most would have retired from demanding responsibilities. Nevertheless, he continued to fulfill his role with the same diligence he had shown throughout his life. He lived in Campden with his wife and son, surrounded by the quiet rhythms of village life. On August 16, 1660, William set out on foot to collect rents in the nearby village of Charingworth, a journey of about 2 miles from his home. It was a routine task, one he had undertaken many times before without incident. However, that evening, William failed to return home. His wife, increasingly anxious as darkness fell, sent the family servant, John Perry, to look for him along the familiar path. When John did not return by the following morning, William's son Edward joined the search, determined to uncover what had happened to his father. Their search led to a disturbing discovery. Along the route to Charingworth, they found a hat, a shirt, and a neckband belonging to William. The garments were stained with blood, and the hat appeared to have been slashed with a sharp instrument. To those who knew William's habits and cautious nature, it seemed clear that something terrible had occurred. With no sign of his body and only these bloodied remnants, the community feared the worst. Rumors spread quickly through Campden that William's life was ended during his journey. Suspicion soon turned toward John Perry, the servant who had been sent to find his master. Under questioning, John offered a shocking confession. He claimed that he, his mother Joan Perry, and his brother Richard had conspired to rob and slain William. According to his account, they had strangled the elderly steward and dumped his body in a mill pond to conceal their crime. Despite the absence of a body, the confession seemed convincing enough to the local authorities, and all 3 members of the Perry family were arrested and charged. The first trial took place in 1661. During the proceedings, inconsistencies emerged in John's statements, including a false story he had told weeks earlier about being attacked by robbers. His testimony implicated his mother and brother, leading to their conviction for robbery, though no conclusive evidence of slaying was presented. It is believed that Joan and Richard pleaded guilty to robbery in hopes of benefiting from the Indemnity and Oblivion Act of 1660, which pardoned certain first-time offenders. Still, questions about the missing body and the truth of John's account lingered. A second trial was convened later that spring, this time charging the Perrys with taking the life of William. By then, John had recanted his earlier confession, claiming that his words were the product of confusion or insanity. Nevertheless, the jury remained unconvinced. Despite the absence of physical proof and John's reversal, all 3 were found guilty and received capital punishment. The verdict was met with both disbelief and grim acceptance among the townspeople. The executions were carried out on Broadway Hill in Gloucestershire. Joan Perry was hanged first, reportedly in an attempt to break any supposed witchcraft spell she might have cast over her sons. Her execution was followed by that of Richard and John, who both maintained their innocence until the end. 2 years after his mysterious disappearance, in 1662, William astonished everyone by returning to England alive. He was older, frail, and marked by the hardships he had endured, yet unmistakably the same William who had vanished on his journey to Charingworth. According to William's own account, he had been kidnapped on the night of his disappearance by 3 horsemen. They had seized him on the road and carried him off against his will, taking him first to the coastal town of Deal. There he claimed he was sold to a ship's captain and transported overseas. His story grew even more extraordinary as he described being sold into slavery in the Ottoman Empire. Forced into servitude, he lived under harsh conditions until the demise of his master provided him with a chance to escape. After his escape, William said he made his way to a seaport, where he managed to stow away on a Portuguese vessel. The ship carried him to Lisbon, where he found temporary refuge before finally securing passage back to England. His return journey was long and dangerous, and it was only after many months that he was able to reach his homeland once more. When he arrived, he was welcomed by astonished neighbors and a deeply shaken family who had mourned him. The revelation that William was alive cast a grim light on the events that had followed his disappearance. The executions of Joan, John, and Richard Perry appeared to be an appalling miscarriage of justice. They had been tried, convicted, and hanged for a crime that had never occurred, their ends resting entirely on John's false confession. The case became one of the most disturbing examples of wrongful conviction in English legal history, raising troubling questions about the reliability of confessions made under pressure. In May 1987, in Hopkins, South Carolina, two hunters stumbled upon a horrifying scene of human remains. With limited forensic tools available at the time, the case quickly went cold, leaving her family without answers until decades later. Patricia Ann Green was born in 1953. She grew up to become a devoted mother who dedicated much of her time and energy to raising her three children. By 1987, Patricia was raising her family in Columbia, South Carolina. At that time, she lived with her three children and her sister in an apartment located on Rice Street, just off Pickens Street. On May 10, 1987, a shocking discovery was made just steps away from the entrance of McEntire Air Base in Hopkins, South Carolina. Two hunters, moving through the area, came across a disturbing sight. What they found would remain with them forever, and in their horror, they quickly contacted law enforcement to report what they had seen. When the police arrived at the scene, they confirmed the hunters' worst fears. The victim was a woman, already deceased. The officers carefully surveyed the area and determined that the woman had been shot multiple times before being left in a culvert. The investigators began piecing together what they could from the scene. They worked to understand how the victim ended up in such a remote and hidden location. While searching the immediate area, the officers noted a small but haunting detail. The woman's shoes were not on her feet. Instead, her untied shoes were found lying nearby on the bank of the ditch, separated from her body. One of the first challenges the authorities were facing was identifying the victim. No identification was recovered at the scene. With no personal belongings or immediate clues at the crime scene, the investigators decided to circulate details of the case locally in the hope that someone might recognize her. Eventually, family members came forward and confirmed the victim was Patricia Ann Green. Years passed without justice, but in the 2000s and 2010s, a new effort emerged. Richland County Sheriff Leon Lott established a cold case squad dedicated to revisiting unsolved cases. This specialized team began reviewing old cases with fresh eyes, determined to apply modern technology to evidence that had once yielded no results. Patricia's case was among those re-examined. The detectives returned to the evidence collected from the crime scene decades earlier. With advances in technology, samples were retested. The new analysis provided investigators with a crucial breakthrough. The DNA results pointed directly to Philip Johnson, a man already serving multiple life sentences in Sumter County. Johnson had been arrested in 1988 and was known for a string of violent crimes. In March 2017, when the investigators confronted him, he offered details about the crime that only the perpetrator could have known. According to his own account, Johnson admitted that Patricia's slaying was part of a spree. He told the investigators there was no specific motive, describing her as simply somebody that he shot and slain. The authorities believe that he ended two women's lives in Sumter County before he ended Patricia's life, and then went on to take the lives of two more women afterward. Johnson remains incarcerated at Kirkland Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina. Reflecting on the case, law enforcement emphasized the importance of persistence. The authorities stated that this case serves as a reminder to victims' families that they are never forgotten. Cold case investigators pledged that no matter how much time passes, they will continue to review old files with the latest technology available. For Patricia's family, the wait for answers stretched nearly 30 years, but with the confession and DNA confirmation, they finally received the truth about what happened to her. In July 2011, a 16-year-old girl left her home in La Paz, Mendoza province in Argentina, but she never returned. What began as a missing person report quickly unraveled into a web of contradictions, silence, and overlooked evidence. Aldana Celeste Orozco Maturano was born in 1997 in La Paz. She grew up in modest circumstances, raised mainly by her mother and stepfather. By 2011, Aldana was in her second year of high school and had begun to develop her own opinions and dreams. Like many teenagers, she was curious about the world beyond her small town. She expressed a desire for independence and talked about finding a way to build a better future for herself and her family. Her teachers saw her as a thoughtful student who worked hard and rarely got into trouble. On July 8th, Aldana was last seen leaving her home, reportedly to visit a friend. It was a normal afternoon, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, Aldana never returned home. As hours turned into days, her family grew increasingly anxious, and what began as mild concern soon turned into panic. When all attempts to locate her failed, they decided to file a missing person report with the local authorities. The initial investigation offered little clarity. The statements given to the police were inconsistent and confusing. Aldana's stepfather told the officers that she had been acting rebellious and suggested that she might have left voluntarily. His account implied that she had run away in search of freedom or independence. But this explanation did not align with what others knew about her. Aldana's friends and classmates rejected the runaway theory. They insisted that she had no boyfriend, no savings, and no plans to leave home. She had shown no signs of distress and had even made plans for school activities later that week. To them, it was unthinkable that she would vanish without telling anyone. These contradictions deepened the mystery surrounding her disappearance, but the investigators appeared reluctant to dig deeper. Within weeks, the case lost momentum. The police treated Aldana's disappearance as a runaway incident rather than a possible kidnapping, which limited the resources and urgency devoted to finding her. No search teams were organized, and no public alerts were issued. For the family, this lack of action was devastating, as every passing day made hope feel more distant. In the months that followed, the neighbors began recalling troubling details from before Aldana went missing. Several reported hearing loud arguments and shouting coming from her home in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Some witnesses also claimed that they had seen unknown men visiting the house at odd hours, raising suspicions about possible connections to trafficking or criminal activity. Despite these disturbing accounts, the authorities failed to follow up on key leads. Testimonies were overlooked, and evidence was never properly examined. As a result, Aldana's case gradually faded from public attention. What began as a missing person investigation soon turned into a cold case, leaving behind unanswered questions. Over the years, her face appeared on missing children campaigns and Interpol databases, keeping her name alive long after the local authorities had closed the file. Activists and independent organizations often cited her case as a symbol of the failures in Argentina's handling of missing person investigations, especially those involving minors from low-income families. For nearly a decade, her family lived between faint hope and painful uncertainty, never knowing whether Aldana was alive or deceased. In December 2020, the long-dormant case suddenly resurfaced when the National Gendarmerie conducted a raid on the home of Aldana's mother and stepfather. The operation led to both being arrested and detained on suspicion of involvement in human trafficking. The investigators alleged that Aldana's disappearance might have been connected to a broader criminal network that operated by recruiting or coercing minors through family members. Following the arrests, the federal court expanded its investigation into a suspected child trafficking network that allegedly involved the exchange or sale of minors. The authorities began uncovering evidence suggesting that vulnerable families had been targeted by traffickers who promised money, favors, or opportunities in return for handing over children. These revelations painted a grim picture of systemic exploitation that had remained hidden in plain sight for years. Then, in 2021, nearly 10 years after she first vanished, Aldana was found alive in Buenos Aires during a police operation against a human trafficking ring. Aldana had been forced into prostitution from a young age and lived under the constant control of her captors. Her years in captivity were marked by abuse, coercion, and the loss of freedom she had once dreamed of gaining. Her recovery brought renewed national attention and forced Argentina to confront deep-rooted issues within its justice system. Journalists, activists, and citizens began questioning how such a case could have gone unnoticed for so long and why early warnings had been dismissed. The public outcry demanded accountability for the neglect and corruption that had allowed Aldana's suffering to continue unchecked. In July 1957, the streets of Los Angeles were shattered by gunfire. Through modern fingerprint and DNA technology, and the perseverance of generations of investigators, the perpetrator was finally unmasked and brought to justice. Richard Phillips was born in 1928 in Los Angeles, California. By the age of 28, he had already built a life grounded in discipline and service. Before stepping into the world of law enforcement, Richard proudly served in the U.S. Navy. After his military service, he settled down, got married, and became a devoted family man, deeply attached to his wife and children. His dedication to both family and community led him to join the El Segundo Police Department in 1955, marking the beginning of his career in public service. Milton Curtis was born 4 years after Richard in 1932, also in Los Angeles. He grew up in the South Bay area, where he attended local schools and became known for his active participation in sports and youth community programs. Like Richard, Milton answered the call to serve his country, enlisting in the U.S. Marine Corps. After earning an honorable discharge, he sought to continue serving others by joining the El Segundo Police Department in 1956. At just 25 years old, Milton was already admired by colleagues for his enthusiasm and dedication. He had married young and built a loving home, cherishing his wife and children above all else. His transition from military to police life came naturally. On July 22, 1957, at around 1 a.m., officers Milton and Richard were on a routine patrol through the streets of Los Angeles. The night had been uneventful until they saw a car run a red light at Rosecrans Avenue. Believing it to be a minor traffic violation, they initiated a standard stop. Officer Milton approached the driver's side of the vehicle to make contact, while Officer Richard remained near the patrol car, radioing the vehicle's license plate number to the dispatcher. What seemed like a routine call suddenly turned grave when the dispatcher reported back that the car had been reported stolen and was possibly linked to an earlier robbery and assault. As the officers waited for confirmation, the situation took a fatal turn. Without warning, the suspect jumped from the vehicle, armed with a revolver. Before either officer could react, he opened fire at close range. The night erupted in gunfire and chaos. Officer Milton was struck 3 times and fell near the front of the patrol car. Officer Richard, though critically wounded, managed to return fire and struck the suspect in the shoulder or back before collapsing near the rear of the car. Moments later, silence filled the street. When dispatch attempted to reach the patrol unit again, there was no response. Within minutes, a nearby patrol unit was dispatched to check on the officer's location. When the backup officers arrived, they found a chilling scene. The El Segundo patrol car remained parked along the roadside, its engine still running, headlights cutting through the dark, and the red spotlight fixed on the stopped vehicle. In front of it sat the stolen car, its driver's door flung open. The officers immediately realized something was terribly wrong. Officer Milton was discovered lying on the pavement near the front of the patrol car. He had been shot 3 times. One bullet wound to the chest proved fatal. Officer Richard was found a few feet away, near the rear of the car, also shot 3 times. His service revolver had been fired once, showing that he had tried to defend himself and his partner despite his mortal injuries. Blood marks and signs of movement indicated that Richard had attempted to reach the radio or take cover after being hit, demonstrating his determination to fight until the very end. Paramedics and additional officers arrived quickly, but their efforts were in vain. Both officers were pronounced deceased at the scene. Grief and shock spread rapidly through the department as the area was cordoned off. Law enforcement agencies from neighboring cities, including El Segundo, Manhattan Beach, and the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, joined in an extensive manhunt. Patrol cars scoured nearby neighborhoods, while helicopters searched from above, but the perpetrator had vanished without a trace. As the investigation unfolded, spent .38 caliber shell casings were recovered at the scene. The stolen Ford car contained partial fingerprints on the steering wheel and door handle, offering only limited clues. Both officers' revolvers were recovered, each showing signs of being fired. Despite the large-scale search, there was no sign of the suspect. With little physical evidence and no immediate leads, the investigation eventually stalled. Despite reward offers and years of determined police work, the case went cold. In September 2002, a false lead unexpectedly breathed new life into a case that had been cold for nearly half a century. The investigators revisited the evidence from the 1957 case, carefully reviewing every piece of information that had once led to ends. During this renewed examination, they decided to rerun the fingerprints recovered from the stolen car through the FBI's National Fingerprint Database, a resource that had not existed at the time of the original investigation. To their surprise, the results revealed a match. The prints belonged to Gerald F. Mason, a man who had been arrested for burglary in South Carolina back in 1956, just a year before the crimes. This discovery changed everything. The detectives began tracking Mason's whereabouts and soon located him living quietly in Columbia, South Carolina. On a January morning in 2003, the federal and local authorities moved in and arrested the 70-year-old man at his home without incident. His neighbors were stunned. The elderly man they knew as friendly and soft-spoken was accused of ending the lives of 2 police officers nearly 50 years earlier. Further investigation confirmed that the evidence left behind in 1957 pointed directly to Mason. Handwriting experts analyzed samples from his past and found they matched entries in a YMCA guest registry from California, where Mason had once signed in using a false name. DNA evidence also tied him to the crime, using samples taken from him after his arrest. In March 2003, Mason appeared in a Los Angeles County courtroom to face the charges. There, he pleaded guilty to both slayings, accepting responsibility after decades of silence. In Hawthorne, California, Mason came upon 4 teenagers at a local lover's lane. Drawing his revolver, Mason forced the 2 couples to strip down to their underwear and bound and blindfolded them. He then indecently assaulted one of the girls. Leaving the teens alive as they were, Mason then drove off in their 1949 Ford sedan, ran a red light, and was pulled over by officers Richard and Milton. Mason later recalled, "I thought, if I do not get them, they are gonna get me. So when the officer turned away from me, I shot both officers, got back in the car, and drove away." When asked why he had indecently assaulted a 15-year-old girl, Mason responded that he no longer remembered. For the next 46 years, Mason was a law-abiding citizen. He owned 7 service stations, married, and raised a family. He was later described by friends and neighbors as friendly and helpful. During sentencing, Mason broke down and offered a tearful apology to the families of the officers, acknowledging the pain and loss he had caused. He said, "It is impossible to express to so many people how sorry I am. I do not understand why I did this. It does not fit in my life. It is not the person I know. I detest these crimes." One El Segundo detective commented, "He was remorseful. but I think he was more sad and more sorry for having been caught. The court sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms in prison, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. For the families of the victims, the moment was bittersweet. Justice had finally been served, but it had come after almost 50 years of unanswered questions and grief. The officers' loved ones, along with members of the law enforcement community, attended the proceedings, honoring the memory of 2 men who had lost their lives in the line of duty. The closure brought some peace, but the weight of the tragedy remained deeply felt. The widow of Milton commented, "I am not his victim anymore. My son is not his victim anymore. I am so grateful, and I had to wait this long. It is worth the wait." Terry, Gerald Mason's daughter, said, "There really are not words to describe the range of emotions we have gone through." Even so, she insisted, "I could not have had a better father." Mason was denied parole in 2009. California prosecutors were determined that he would never be released. He remained incarcerated until he passed away in January 2017. Reflecting on the case, Los Angeles County Sheriff Lee Baca emphasized that while advances in technology had played a crucial role in solving the decades-old case, it was the unwavering determination of generations of investigators that truly brought Mason to justice. Their persistence ensured that, even after nearly half a century, the sacrifices of officers Richard Phillips and Milton Curtis would never be forgotten. One night in June 1988, a 22-year-old man set out on a short errand in Los Angeles, California, but never returned. The perpetrator would be identified decades later with a shocking turn of events. Matthew Chase was born in 1965 in Los Angeles and spent his childhood in the vibrant landscape of Southern California. He was the youngest of 3 children, growing up in a family that went through the challenges of divorce early in his life. Matthew attended local public schools in Los Angeles. He graduated from John Burroughs High School in Burbank. After high school, his passion for creative expression led him to enroll at a Los Angeles community college where he focused his studies on photography and visual arts. At 22 years old, Matthew had begun to build a promising future for himself. He worked for a computer services company in Burbank. Matthew shared an apartment with 2 close friends who saw him as more than just a roommate. They considered him family. On June 8, 1988, Matthew borrowed his roommate's car to run a few simple errands. Among them was a stop to pick up cat food, a quick task that should have taken no more than 15 minutes. That evening, he drove toward Vermont Avenue near Los Feliz Boulevard, where he decided to withdraw some cash from a Bank of America ATM. The machine was located in a small, dimly lit strip mall parking lot, a quiet corner that appeared ordinary but would soon become the last place he was seen alive. When Matthew failed to return home within the expected time, his roommates grew uneasy. Hours passed with no word, and their concern deepened into fear. Acting quickly, one of his roommates called the bank, pretending to be Matthew, to check the activity on his account. What he learned was deeply troubling. Matthew's ATM card had been used multiple times that night. The bank records showed an initial successful transaction, a deposit and cash withdrawal, followed by several more attempts, including one for $280, which exceeded the daily withdrawal limit. Realizing something was terribly wrong, the roommate immediately contacted the police and reported Matthew missing. The investigators began their search and obtained the surveillance footage from the ATM. The images revealed a chilling detail. During the transactions, a man stood close to Matthew's shoulder, his posture and movements suggesting control or intimidation. The stranger was described as shorter and stockier than Matthew, and the footage led the police to believe that Matthew might have been abducted during or shortly after the ATM visit. Further investigation showed that Matthew's card had been used again later that night at another Bank of America branch. This time, a hidden security camera captured the same man attempting multiple transactions. The attempts eventually failed, and the card was confiscated by the machine. When it was later examined, the investigators found no usable fingerprints, The surface appeared wiped clean or handled with gloves, further supporting the suspicion of foul play and a calculated effort to avoid detection. Weeks later, on June 27th, the car Matthew had been driving was discovered abandoned not far from where he disappeared. Inside, the investigators found no fingerprints, no signs of struggle, only a single piece of evidence, a blue bandana that did not belong to Matthew or his roommates. Then, on September 17th, nearly 3 months after his disappearance, human remains were found in a ravine in Pasadena. It was not until March 29th, 1989, that dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to Matthew Chase. The cause of demise was determined to be a gunshot wound. The police concluded that Matthew had likely been kidnapped, robbed, and slain within hours of the ATM incident. While robbery appeared to be the motive, some investigators speculated that he may have been ended to silence him. Despite numerous leads and extensive investigation, no arrests were ever made, and the identity of Matthew's perpetrator remains unknown. In 2018, after 3 decades of unanswered questions, the detectives contacted Matthew's family with a long-awaited update. They informed his mother that the case had been officially cleared. According to their findings, the person responsible for Matthew's crime had been identified as a 20-year-old suspected gang member named David Bear Meza. For years, Meza's name had surfaced in scattered rumors and confidential leads, but only later did the investigators find enough evidence to close the case with confidence. In a tragic and almost ironic twist, Meza himself never faced justice. On the night of June 10, 1988, less than 2 days after Matthew vanished, Meza was shot and slain in a drive-by shooting on a street corner in the Rampart area of Los Angeles. The police reports indicated that he was likely the victim of gang-related violence, suggesting that his own associates may have turned against him. His demise abruptly ended any chance for a formal confession or trial, leaving the investigators to piece together the truth through evidence and witness statements. During the renewed investigation, the detectives re-examined the surveillance photographs taken from the bank's hidden cameras. When shown the images, Meza's girlfriend immediately identified him as the man standing close to Matthew during the ATM transactions. Her statement provided the crucial link that the authorities needed to confirm his involvement. The resemblance between Meza and the man in the footage, along with the timing of his demise and other circumstantial evidence, led the investigators to conclude that Meza had been the one who abducted and ended the life of Matthew. The investigators theorized that Meza had approached Matthew under the pretense of help or threat, forcing him to withdraw cash before likely taking his life to prevent identification. Despite the lingering uncertainty surrounding possible accomplices, the authorities were confident that Meza played the central role in the crime. While detectives could not rule out the involvement of others, they found no conclusive proof linking any additional suspects. By law and procedure, the Los Angeles Police Department classified the case as cleared by exceptional means, meaning the perpetrator was identified but could not be prosecuted. For Matthew's family and friends, the news brought mixed emotions. After years of pain, rumors, and ends, they finally had a name and a clearer picture of what had happened. In April 1987, a dismembered female body surfaced in the Maiyang River of Hunan, China. What began as a crime case ended as one of the most haunting wrongful convictions in modern Chinese history. Shi Xiaorong was a native of Kaili, a small city in Guizhou province in southwestern China. Her family lived a simple life, relying on the limited income from their small rice plots. Coming from a farming household of modest means, she grew up in an environment where every family member's contribution mattered. She had several siblings, and together they shared the responsibilities of daily labor, tending to the crops and livestock that sustained them. From a young age, she attended the local village primary school, but her education was cut short. Like many rural girls of that era, she had to leave school early to assist her family with household chores and fieldwork. By the mid-1980s, Xi's determination to change her circumstances grew stronger. She made the life-altering decision to leave home. She traveled outward in search of work, hoping to secure a position in a factory or the service sector in neighboring provinces. But as she stepped into this new chapter, she had no way of knowing what awaited her. Her family began to worry when months passed without any word from her. Letters that once carried her brief updates stopped arriving, and no one in the nearby provinces seemed to know her whereabouts. Concern turned into alarm, and her parents, accompanied by her elder brother, went to the local public security bureau to report her missing. They described her age, appearance, and travel intentions, hoping that someone, somewhere, might have seen her. The police recorded the report and attempted to circulate the information to other regions where she might have traveled. But in the 1980s, China lacked a centralized missing persons system or national coordination between provincial police. Without modern databases or communication networks, follow-up depended largely on phone calls, personal contacts, and handwritten reports. For Shi's family, this meant uncertainty and silence. They could only wait and hope for news that never came. In April 1987, the quiet search took a grim turn. A dismembered female body was discovered in the Mayang River in Hunan province, a region where Shi was believed to have traveled. Local police took charge of the case and, after basic comparisons of appearance and timeline, identified the body as belonging to Shi. Soon after, the police arrested Teng Xingshan, a local butcher in Mayang County. He was accused of indecently assaulting, robbing, and ending the life of Shi. The investigators claimed that the two had some form of acquaintance or relationship, though details of how they supposedly met remained vague. The prosecution alleged that Teng had taken Shi's life after suspecting her of stealing money from him, and that he then dismembered her body to conceal the crime. The method of dismemberment was described by investigators as very professional, a point heavily emphasized in court because Teng's trade as a butcher was said to make him capable of such precision. During the investigation, Teng allegedly confessed to the crime. The authorities stated that his confession matched the supposed evidence and the scientific examination of the remains, which they claimed confirmed his guilt. There was little room for doubt presented during the proceedings. Once the confession was recorded, the case moved swiftly through the legal system. Defense arguments, if any, were not documented in detail, and there was minimal scrutiny of how the confession had been obtained. Based on the confession and the prosecution's narrative, Teng was convicted. The court delivered a capital punishment sentence, citing the brutality of the crime and the apparent certainty of his guilt. On January 28, 1989, just 2 years after Shi disappeared, Teng was executed by firing squad. In a shocking turn of events nearly 2 decades later, Shi reappeared in 2005, alive and well. Her sudden return shattered what had long been accepted as fact, that she had been deceased since 1987. She revealed that she had been trafficked and sold into marriage in Shandong province in March 1987, just 1 month before the dismembered body was discovered in Hunan. She had lived in forced isolation for years, far from her hometown, unable to contact her family. When she finally regained her freedom and learned of the case, she was horrified to discover that an innocent man had been executed. Upon her reappearance, Shi stated clearly that she had no connection to Teng and had never met him. She expressed deep distress over what had been done in her name and urged the authorities to correct the miscarriage of justice. Her case quickly drew public attention, as the revelation contradicted every piece of evidence that had once been used to convict Teng. Shi's reemergence also revived long-held suspicions among some locals in Guizhou, who had heard faint rumors in the early 1990s that she might still be alive. Her family later confirmed that she had actually returned to her hometown briefly in 1993, years before the truth reached wider attention. At the time, many found the rumors too difficult to believe, given the official records. It was only in 2005, when she came forward publicly, that the truth could no longer be ignored. The revelation of Shi's survival prompted Teng's children to take legal action. They filed a lawsuit at the Hunan Higher People's Court, demanding a formal declaration of their father's innocence. For them, the discovery was bittersweet. While their father's name could finally be cleared, it could not undo the years of stigma and loss they had endured after his execution. The investigators and courts were forced to confront the devastating reality that an innocent man had been executed based on coerced confession and flawed identification. The case was revisited with growing public and legal pressure, as it became clear that rectifying the wrongful conviction was both a legal and moral necessity. In 2005, the Hunan Higher People's Court officially overturned Teng's conviction, declaring him innocent posthumously. His exoneration came 16 years after his execution. While justice arrived too late to save him, the ruling served as a powerful acknowledgement of the tragedy that had unfolded, a story of loss, error, and the enduring human cost of wrongful conviction.